If you've ever watched your own future disappear while your family smiled and called it necessary, then you'll understand this story. The day I found out my college fund was gone, my mother didn't cry. She didn't apologize. She said, it was for something important. Important. More important than my education. More important than my future. More important than me. And that was the moment I realized I wasn't the priority in my own family. My name is Claire Bennett. I'm 32 years old now, and I built my life from scratch. But when I was 17, I believed in something dangerous. I believed my parents when they said, "Don't worry. Your college fund is safe." My grandparents started it when I was born. My parents added to it every year. At every Thanksgiving dinner, my dad would proudly announce, "Claire won't have to struggle as we did." I worked hard in high school because I thought I had a foundation under me. I skipped parties. I took AP classes. I volunteered. I earned my acceptance into Northwestern University. The acceptance letter felt like a reward for years of discipline, but the real shock came 2 weeks later. Dad called me into the kitchen one evening and said, "Let's review your tuition plan." That was the first time I logged into the college account myself, and the first time I saw a zero balance. I refreshed the page 3 times. Nothing changed. "There must be a mistake," I said. Mom walked in calmly, drying her hands. "There's no mistake," she said softly. My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Dad cleared his throat. "We needed the money temporarily." "Temporarily for what?" Silence. Then my mother said the words I still hear in my head sometimes. "For Emily's wedding." My cousin Emily, the golden child of our extended family. The one with the perfect engagement, the perfect fiancé, the perfect venue. Her wedding had become the event of the year. Apparently my future was funding it. "You used my college fund?" I asked slowly. "It's not like that," Dad said quickly. "It was a family decision." "A family decision?" I repeated. "I wasn't asked." Mom sighed like I was being dramatic. "Appearances matter, Claire. Her fiancé's family is wealthy. We couldn't show up looking cheap. So you decided I could look cheap instead?" Dad's voice hardened. "Watch your tone." My tone, not the missing $120,000, not the fact that my tuition was gone. My tone, "We'll help you with loans," Mom said. "You're smart, you'll get scholarships, you'll manage." Manage, that was their favorite word, you'll manage. That night, I locked myself in my room and stared at my acceptance letter for hours. I wasn't just losing money. I was losing security, trust, the belief that I mattered as much as a party. The wedding happened that summer. White roseware imported from Italy, a live band, designer dresses. I worked part-time at a catering company to start saving for textbooks. I served drinks at my cousin's rehearsal dinner while watching my parents smile proudly in photos. Emily hugged me that night and said, "It's just money. You'll make it back." Just money. I went to Northwestern anyway. On loans, on scholarships, on 3 jobs. I graduated with honors and $147,000 in debt. My parents never apologized. They said things like, "You're strong. You'll succeed no matter what." It all worked out, but it didn't work out. It cost me years of pressure, anxiety, and financial stress. And I never forgot it. Fast forward 15 years, I paid off my loans early. I built a solid career in healthcare administration in Chicago. I bought my own condo. I lived carefully, strategically. I stopped depending on anyone. Then the phone rang one Tuesday evening. It was my mother. Her voice was shaking. "Claire, your father collapsed." Everything inside me went cold. "He had a heart attack. He's stable, but the hospital bills, we don't have enough coverage." I already knew where this was going. "We were hoping you could help," she said quietly. I closed my eyes. "How much?" "About 80,000. 80,000. Almost the exact amount they had borrowed from my future. I had the money. I could wire it the next morning. But something inside me refused to move, because this wasn't just about medical bills. It was about accountability. And for the first time in my life, they were the ones asking. I didn't answer my mother that night. I told her I needed time. Not because I didn't know what I wanted to do, but because I needed to make sure my decision came from strength, not anger. Anger fades, power doesn't. My name is Claire Bennett, and for the first time in my life, my parents needed something from me that I wasn't obligated to give. I flew back to Ohio 2 days later. The hospital room felt smaller than I expected. My father looked human, not the commanding, reputation-obsessed man I grew up with. Just a 63-year-old man with gray hair, an oxygen tube, and fear behind his eyes. For a second, I almost broke. Almost. "Hey, kid," he said weakly when he saw me. Kid. I hadn't been a kid in a long time. "How are you feeling?" I asked. "I got hit by a truck," he said, forcing a smile. Mom stood beside the bed holding a thick folder. She didn't waste time. "These are the bills so far," she said. "Of course." I took the folder and sat down. Surgery, ICU, medication, specialist consultations. The total was already climbing past $80,000, and that was before rehabilitation. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. "We don't know how we're going to manage." That word again. Manage. I looked at them both carefully. "Where are your savings?" I asked. Dad avoided eye contact. Mom answered instead. "We had to use some of it over the years." "For what?" Silence. I didn't need a spreadsheet to guess. Home renovations to keep up. Donations to Emily's business startup that failed. Vacations they posted proudly online. Appearances. "You spent everything," I said calmly. Dad bristled. "We didn't expect this to happen." "No one expects emergencies," I replied. "That's why people protect their safety nets." Mom's eyes filled with tears. "Claire, please, this isn't the time." "Actually, I thought it's exactly the time." "I can help," I said evenly. Relief washed over both of them instantly. "But," I continued, "it won't be a gift." The relief disappeared. "What do you mean?" Dad asked, his tone sharpening despite the hospital bed. "I mean this will be a formal loan, written contract, monthly repayments with interest." The room went quiet. Mom stared at me like she didn't recognize her own daughter. "Interest?" she whispered. "Yes, Claire, were your parents. And I was your daughter when you spent my college fund." Dad's jaw tightened. "That was different." "How? It was for family." I leaned forward slightly. "So is this." Neither of them had an answer. I continued calmly, almost clinically. "I will cover the immediate hospital expenses so collections don't damage your credit. After that, we draft a repayment agreement, fixed monthly amount. If payments are missed, we restructure assets." Mom blinked. "Restructure assets?" "Yes, the house." The word hit hard. "You wouldn't," she breathed. I held her gaze. "You taught me that money decisions have consequences." Dad's face flushed. "You're punishing us." "No," I said quietly. "I'm protecting myself." The truth was, I could afford to give them the money outright. But that wasn't the point anymore. For 15 years, I carried the weight of their decision. The loans. The stress, the second job, the anxiety of watching my peers graduate debt-free while I calculated interest rates. They called it temporary. I called it defining. I stood up. "I'll have my attorney draft the agreement." Dad stared at me as I had just betrayed him. "You've changed," he said. "Yes," I replied. "I have." That night, Mom followed me out into the hospital parking lot. The air was cold. "You're being cold," she said quietly. "No," I said. "I'm being fair." She shook her head. "We sacrificed for you your whole life." I almost laughed. "You didn't sacrifice my college fund." She flinched. "You don't understand the pressure we were under," she insisted. "Emily's fiancé's family was judging us. We couldn't look small." "And I could," I asked. She had no answer. Then she tried something else. "What will people think if they find out you charged your own parents' interest?" There it was. People, appearances, even now. "I don't care what people think anymore," I said calmly. "I care about balance." She looked at me differently then, not as her daughter, as someone she no longer controlled. "You've become ruthless," she said. "No," I replied softly. "I've become independent." The contract was signed 2 weeks later. Dad was discharged. Physical therapy began. The hospital stopped calling. And for a few months, they made their payments on time. But something shifted in the family dynamic. Word spread. Emily called me one night. I heard you're making Aunt Susan and Uncle Mark pay you back, she said. I am. That's extreme, is it? They helped me when I needed it. I smiled slightly. Yes, they did. There was a long pause. You're holding a grudge, she accused. No, I said. I'm holding a boundary. 3 months later, the first payment was late. Then the second. Then the excuses started. Medical follow-ups were expensive. Utilities went up. Dad couldn't work full-time anymore. I listened. I documented. I didn't argue. On the fourth missed payment, I scheduled a meeting at their house. The same house where they once told me my future was negotiable. I walked in with a folder. They looked nervous. What's this? Dad asked. A restructuring plan, I said calmly. Mom's hands started shaking. Claire, I placed the papers on the table. If payments can't continue, we move to asset adjustment. Dad stared at me. You're serious? Yes, you'd take our house. I held his gaze. You took my security. Silence filled the room like thick smoke, and for the first time in my life, they looked small. But what happened next? The thing none of us expected would change everything. Because 2 days later, I received a phone call that made this situation 1,000 times more complicated. And this time, it wasn't from my parents. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it. Almost. Hello? There was a pause on the other end, then a familiar voice. Claire, it's Aunt Linda, Emily's mother. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a year. Hi, I said cautiously. I need to talk to you, privately. Her tone wasn't warm. It wasn't defensive either. It sounded uneasy. I'm listening. There was another pause. Then she said something that made my grip tighten around my phone. You don't know the whole story about that wedding. My heart slowed. I know enough. No, she said quietly. You don't. I didn't respond. She exhaled shakily. Your parents offered the money. We didn't ask. That stopped me. They told me they had savings set aside and wanted to contribute significantly. They insisted. My chest tightened. They said it was extra money, she continued. They said your college was fully handled. I felt like the floor beneath me shifted. That's not true, I said flatly. I'm starting to realize that, she replied softly. Silence stretched between us. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because your mother called me last night. My stomach dropped. She asked if we could help them financially. Mentioned you were being difficult. Difficult, I almost laughed. And, I asked. And I told her no. That surprised me. She didn't like that, Aunt Linda added. She implied you were holding a grudge over something that was technically their money. Technically, I closed my eyes. They told everyone it was their contribution, Aunt Linda continued. They made it sound generous, responsible. No one knew it was your fund. Of course they didn't. Appearances, reputation, control the narrative. I thought you should know, she said gently. Because if I were you, I'd want the truth. The truth. The part that hurt the most wasn't the money. It was the lie. They hadn't just taken my future. They had rewritten the story so they looked noble. After we hung up, I sat in silence for a long time. For 15 years, I believed they had made a desperate family choice under pressure. But this was calculated. They volunteered my security to buy social status, and then painted themselves as generous benefactors. That night, I drove back to Ohio without telling them. I needed to see their faces when I asked. They were both in the living room when I walked in. Mom looked startled. Claire, we weren't expecting you. I know, I said calmly. Dad muted the television. What's wrong? I didn't sit down. Did Emily's family ask you for money? They exchanged a glance. It doesn't matter now, Mom said quickly. It matters to me, Dad sighed. We offered. The confirmation hit harder than I expected. You offered my college fund, I said slowly. It was the right thing to do at the time. For who? For the family. I shook my head slightly. No, for your pride. Dad's jaw tightened. You don't understand the pressure. I understand that you lied. Mom flinched. You told them my college was already paid for. Silence. That wasn't exactly, yes or no, another long pause. Yes, the word landed between us like a final verdict. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not sadness, clarity. You didn't just take the money, I said quietly. You erased me from the equation. That's dramatic, Dad snapped. No, I replied evenly. It's accurate. Mom started crying. We did what we thought was best. For who? I asked again. Neither of them answered. I stepped closer to the coffee table and placed another folder down. What's that? Dad asked cautiously. Documentation. Of what? Of the original account. The contributions from Grandma and Grandpa, the dates, the withdrawal records. Mom's face went pale. Why would you dig that up? Because the account wasn't fully yours. Dad froze. What are you talking about? Grandpa listed me as a direct beneficiary when he started it. That means legally, part of that money belonged to me. Silence, heavy. You're bluffing, Dad said quietly. I'm not. I had spent the last week reviewing old financial paperwork with my attorney. The account had been set up in my name, with my parents as custodians until I turned 18. They withdrew everything 6 months before my 18th birthday. Legally, it was murky. Morally, it was crystal clear. You wouldn't take us to court, Mom whispered. I looked at her calmly. You said what would people think if they knew I charged you interest, she swallowed. Imagine what they'd think if they knew you used your daughter's inheritance to impress strangers. Dad stood up abruptly. You're threatening us. No, I said quietly. I'm correcting the balance. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear, not of money, of exposure. And that's when I understood something important. They weren't afraid of losing the house. They were afraid of losing their image. I don't want your house, I said softly. They both looked confused. I want acknowledgement. Silence. Public, I added. Mom stared at me. You want us to humiliate ourselves? I want you to tell the truth. Dad's face hardened. That will destroy us. I tilted my head slightly. No, I said. It will reveal you. The room felt suffocating. Finally, Mom whispered, What exactly are you asking? I met their eyes evenly. At the next family gathering, you tell everyone where that wedding money really came from. The color drained from Dad's face. That's insane. No, I said calmly. It's accountability. He shook his head. You burned down your own family. I took a slow breath. You burned down my future. Silence swallowed the room. And for the first time, they had no control over the narrative. But what did they decide to do next? It would either repair something broken or shatter it permanently. The next family gathering was my grandmother's 75th birthday. Of all days, 75 years of dignity, of tradition, of Sunday dinners and carefully ironed tablecloths. My grandmother believed family meant loyalty. She also believed in honesty. That's why I chose that day. I didn't tell anyone what was coming. Not Aunt Linda, not Emily, not even my brother, Jason. I wanted it to be real, unrehearsed, no damage control. When I walked into my grandmother's house, I felt the old version of myself trying to resurface. The quiet one, the agreeable one. The one who swallowed discomfort to keep peace. But I wasn't her anymore. My name is Claire Bennett, and I was done shrinking to protect people who never protected me. Mom and Dad arrived 20 minutes later. I could see the tension in the way they moved. Stiff shoulders, forced smiles. They knew. We hadn't spoken since the night I made my request. The house was full. Cousins laughing, plates clinking. Stories are being told about childhood summers. Normal, that's the thing about family dysfunction, it hides inside normal moments. Grandma stood near the fireplace when Dad cleared his throat. He looked at me first, not angrily, not warmly, just resigned. Before we cut the cake, he began, voice slightly unsteady, I need to say something. The room quieted. Mom reached for his hand. Her knuckles were white. Dad took a breath. Years ago, when Emily got married, we made a financial contribution. Emily smiled automatically from across the room. He continued. That contribution came from Claire's college fund. The room froze, utter silence. It wasn't dramatic shouting or gasps, it was worse. Stillness. Emily's smile dropped. Aunt Linda blinked in confusion. Grandma frowned slightly. Dad kept going, like ripping off a bandage. We told everyone it was our savings, it was. It was money set aside for Claire's education. My heart pounded in my ears. Mom's voice shook as she added, We made that decision without her consent. There it was, consent. Jason looked at me slowly, disbelief in his eyes. You're saying, Aunt Linda began carefully, the wedding money was Claire S. Yes, Dad said quietly. Emily's face flushed deep red. You never told me that, she whispered. We didn't want to embarrass anyone, Mom said quickly. Embarrass. The irony almost made me laugh. Grandma stepped forward. Is this true, Claire? She asked gently. I nodded. Yes. And you still went to college? On loans, I said. The word seemed to echo. Loans. Jason swore under his breath. Emily looked like she might cry. I didn't know, she said, her voice small. I believe you, I replied calmly, and I did, because this wasn't about her anymore. This was about them. Grandma turned to my parents slowly. You used her inheritance. Dad looked down. Yes, and you told people it was yours. Yes. Grandma's disappointment filled the room like smoke. That wasn't right, she said simply. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cruel. It was worse. It was true. Mom started crying. We thought we were protecting the family image. Grandma's eyes sharpened. At what cost? Silence. Everyone knew the answer, me. For years, I had been painted as successful, independent, strong. No one knew the pressure behind it, the debt, the sleepless nights. The panic attacks during exam weeks were because failure wasn't an option when loans were breathing down my neck. Jason walked toward me. You never told me, he said quietly. I didn't think anyone would want to hear it. Emily approached slowly. I would have scaled the wedding back, she said softly. I didn't need all that. I believed her too. Because she looked horrified, Dad suddenly looked older than I'd ever seen him. We were wrong, he said finally. Not defensive, not justifying, wrong. The word landed heavier than any argument we'd ever had. Mom nodded through tears. We were ashamed to admit we couldn't afford the image we wanted. And there it was, the real truth. It wasn't generosity. It wasn't family unity. It was insecurity. Grandma took my hand. You deserved better, she said gently. Those 3 words nearly broke me, because I hadn't heard them before. I didn't cry, I just nodded. After that, the party continued, but differently. Quieter, reflective. People avoided small talk and instead asked real questions. Jason hugged me tightly before he left. I'm proud of you, he said. Emily sent me a message later that night apologizing again. And my parents, they didn't speak much. When I finally stepped outside to get some air, Dad followed. The night was cool, the street is quiet. You got what you wanted, he said softly. Yes, I replied. And now, I looked at him. I'm not taking the house, he blinked. You're not? No, Mom had joined us, listening. I'll remove the interest, I continued. You'll repay only what I covered for the hospital, no penalties. They both stared at me, stunned. Why? Mom asked. Because revenge was never about destruction. It was about balance. Because accountability was the point, I said quietly. Not punishment, Dad swallowed. I don't know how to fix what we did. You don't, I replied honestly, but you don't repeat it either. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful embrace, just a quiet shift. For the first time, the truth existed in the open. But what none of us expected was how the truth would ripple in ways none of us could control. Because 3 weeks later, Emily made a decision that changed everything again. 3 weeks after my grandmother's birthday, I received a message from Emily. Not a text, an email. Subject line, we need to talk. That alone told me this wasn't casual. We met at a small cafe halfway between Chicago and Ohio. Neutral ground, no family listening through walls. No tension humming in the background. Emily looked different, less polished, more real. I've been thinking about everything, she said after we sat down. About the wedding, about the money. About what it costs you, I waited. I didn't know, she repeated. But that doesn't mean I didn't benefit from it. I nodded slowly. That's true. She didn't flinch at the honesty. I sold my engagement ring, she said quietly. That surprised me. It's been sitting in a drawer since the divorce. I didn't want it. It felt symbolic of something fake. And I want to give you the money, I stared at her. Emily, you don't owe me. Maybe not legally, she said, but morally. I do. The ring had been expensive. Her ex-husband came from money. I knew it wasn't small. I can't accept that, I said gently. You can, she replied firmly. And you will. For the first time, I saw something I hadn't before. Not the golden child, not the center of attention, just a woman realizing she had been part of something unfair. I don't want the money, I told her. She frowned. Then what do you want? I thought about that carefully. I want us to stop pretending that what happened was normal. She leaned back. It was. No, I said. It was. Emily took a slow breath. Then let me do this, she said. Not to repay you, but to reset something. I didn't answer right away. Because this was bigger than a check. This was about whether we kept cycling through guilt and repayment or actually healed. Finally, I said, if you want to do something meaningful, invest in it. In what? In something that creates opportunity, not appearances. She studied my face. You're serious? I always was. 2 months later, we launched a small scholarship fund in my grandparents' name. Not huge, but enough to help one student each year avoid taking on crushing debt. Emily contributed the ring money. I matched it. We didn't make a big announcement. No press release. No dramatic speeches, just paperwork and purpose. When I told my grandmother, she cried. Now that, she said softly, is family. My parents found out shortly after. Dad called me. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Yes, I replied. I did. There was a long pause. I've been thinking, he continued, about why we did what we did. I stayed silent. I was insecure, he admitted. I grew up with nothing. When I finally had something, I didn't know how to handle being seen as less. His voice cracked slightly. I thought if we looked successful, we'd become it. I closed my eyes. But we weren't, he added. We were pretending. Yes, I said softly, and we hurt you in the process. That was the first time he said it plainly. No excuses, no deflection, just acknowledgement. I'm sorry, Claire. The words didn't erase the debt I carried for years. They didn't erase the stress or the anxiety or the nights I lay awake calculating interest. But they mattered. Because accountability isn't loud. It's quiet, it's uncomfortable, it's real. Mom started sending the monthly payments again after that, on time, without reminders. They downsized their house 6 months later. Not because I forced them to, because they finally understood that living within reality was better than chasing an image. And me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. For years, I thought revenge meant taking something back. The house, the money, the power. But I learned something else. Real revenge isn't destruction. It's forcing truth into the open and refusing to carry someone else's shame. I could have wiped them out financially. I could have taken the house and called it justice. But then I would have become what hurt me. Instead, I chose boundaries. I chose documentation. I chose exposure. And then I chose growth. One evening, almost a year later, Dad visited my condo in Chicago. He stood on my balcony, looking out at the skyline. You built this yourself, he said quietly. Yes, he nodded slowly. I should have been proud of that from the start. I didn't answer right away, because pride wasn't what I needed anymore. I needed you to respect it, I said finally. He looked at me. I do, and this time I believed him. Not because he said it, but because his actions had finally aligned with his words. The hospital bills were eventually paid off completely. The scholarship fund helped its first student the following fall. And at the next family gathering, when someone jokingly brought up that legendary wedding, my father corrected them. It wasn't legendary, he said calmly. It was expensive and we made mistakes. No one argued, no one laughed, they just nodded. Because the truth had settled in. I used to think the worst thing my parents did was spend my college fund. It was. The worst thing was teaching me that image mattered more than integrity. But in the end, the lesson reversed itself. Integrity outlasts image, boundaries outlast guilt, and healing outlasts revenge. My name is Claire Bennett, and I didn't destroy my parents. I made them face themselves. That was enough.